Hey folks, welcome back. Jerry once again here at Hilltop Firearms Training Center, Dover, Tennessee. Thank you for watching. 1 month ago today, we saw yet another school shooting. 17 lives taken. Across our nation, people are extremely tense, upset, and fed up with it. The violence has to stop. This video isn't though about gun control, because that's what a lot of people are talking about. In fact, I turned the news on just a little while ago. Over 2,000 schools across our nation were seeing students rallying against gun violence. They're fed up with it, they want it to end. Most people feel that gun control is the natural solution to a problem. If you know me or you follow this channel, you know that's not my viewpoint at all. Gun control, it's not going to fix it. Tighter registration, limitations, enacting possibly another assault weapons ban, that's not going to fix anything. It didn't fix it back in 1994. However, I'm not going to talk about that. I'm not going to waste my time and energy talking about gun control when I do not believe in it. I want to talk about something else that is very relevant, very controversial, and very current on the minds of people across our nation. Talking about the subject pertaining to the arming of school teachers. I never thought that we would reach a point where this would ever be, say, brought up or considered. However, sometimes due to events, things happening, sometimes we must evolve, adapt, and overcome in the face of violence. However, what is your viewpoint on the arming of school teachers? Now, I'm going to give you some of the pros, some of the cons. I'm going to give you my opinion of what I believe. Following the end of this video, if you would, please post your comments below. I do want to hear from you. I always say this, and I mean it. If we can, let's try to keep it professional, because this is a heated debate. So, let's talk just a little bit about the possibility of having armed school teachers in our schools across the nation. Let's first talk about school teachers in general. I've always felt that a good school teacher is a rare breed of a person. The reason is, a few years ago, while I was still in law enforcement, I remember going into our local school systems, from the elementary school to the middle school to the high school, and trying to implement different programs, from seatbelt safety to underage drinking, drug use. Tried to kind of form a relationship with some of the students to show them that police officers were there to assist and to help them, and not to be the one that they need to worry about. And I'll tell you this, having worked with the youth in our schools, it takes a special person to be a teacher. It's not easy. I feel that school teachers have so much on their plate, especially as youth continues to change and kind of evolve with the times and technologies. Teachers have more than ever quite the challenge of teaching youth across our nation. Over the years, we see teachers that make a difference in a student's life by maybe giving them that just little extra bit of encouragement, or letting the student who, say, maybe has a need or a special talent to really focus in on that, possibly altering their lives in such a good way, in a positive way, where that student perhaps pursues a dream and a goal. So I hold our teachers with the highest, utmost respect for taking a job that is often overlooked. So now we are at yet another crossroad. An unprecedented time in our history where people calling the shots at both the federal and state level are considering whether arming school teachers is a viable option. Let's talk about it. This is what we're here for. What might be the benefit of having a teacher armed with a firearm, working as both an educator and a protector? The first thing that comes to my mind is something that has been crucial in every active shooter situation since they began. Time. Time is critical. From Columbine to Virginia Tech, one thing in common: time. Police, law enforcement responding, it takes them a while to get on scene, to make entry, and to hunt down the shooter, to stop them. Virginia Tech, we lost 32 people in 2007. One shooter took 32 lives. Police showed up. He killed himself because he wasn't willing to get into any kind of a fight with the police, and he also wasn't willing to go to prison. He went from classroom to classroom, shooting people every few seconds. So, if we're going to even consider arming teachers, let's think about what if one faculty member of Virginia Tech had been armed. Within the first few seconds of hearing the gunfire, they would have been quicker to respond than any law enforcement agency because they're there in the building. In, I think, 2008, I remember reading an article by a law enforcement official by the name of Ron Borsch. And he wrote an article called The Stopwatch of Death. I'm going to post a link below on that. I want you to look at something. But the times were getting shorter and the death count was going up in every one of the documented active shooter incidences. So an armed teacher with the right training, working right there inside the school, suddenly violence breaks out. Could they perhaps make a difference? Absolutely. But what about all of the cons against having armed teachers? First of all, here in Tennessee, in order to carry a firearm legally, as of right now, since 1996, a person must complete an 8-hour handgun carry permit class, which consists of going over the laws, liabilities, legal justification of the use of deadly force, 50-round course of fire. You answer some questions on a test, you score a minimum of 70 on both, then you're able to carry a firearm each and every day you leave your house. Would that be enough for our teachers to carry guns? In my opinion, absolutely not. The liabilities associated with carrying a firearm and also providing protection and the security of our youth in our schools across the nation, too much liability. Simply by saying, well, I got my permit, absolutely nothing would make me feel like these people were adequately prepared. I think at a minimum, they should be required to complete almost what law enforcement does at most police academies, at least say a 40-hour, 1-week training class involving firearms. In addition to that, I feel if a school teacher is going to carry a firearm, they must meet certain skill requirements, a standardization of whether it is a qualification course, a stress course, and all of the other things associated with carrying a firearm just as it is required of law enforcement. I feel like trauma training, trauma care, being able to deal not only with the violence but also to be able to save lives could be partly implemented into that. Every few months, I feel that they would need to be able to be retested to make sure that they are still up to par. With most law enforcement agencies, it's usually once to twice a year of daily and weekly and monthly in-service. They're required so many hours of training. If you're a member of a school and you're a teacher, it should be no different. You're protecting our children, you better be up to par with your skills. I feel certain people should be selected over others. Possibly you have a teacher that is prior service member, someone that had served in one of our armed forces. They would likely be a better candidate. But here's where I'm going to say something, and I don't mean this in any way, shape, or fashion against any of our armed forces. Active duty, retired, previous. In 11 years that I have been teaching firearms, I've interacted with some service members, prior service members, that had been in the service. And they come up here to say get their handgun permit. Just because you served at one time doesn't mean you were 100% up to par. You may have been really awesome at one time, but life happens. We get complacent, we get comfortable, we get rusty, out of shape, whatever. I've seen it one time too many where sometimes we need to knock the rust off to regain that old skill set we once had. So while I feel like a prior service member would make a great armed part of the school personnel, they still need to meet the qualifications and the expectations and hold them to that high standard. And I do not mean anything derogatory towards our armed service members, past and present, but I have seen and interacted and had them on this very range in classes that weren't quite where they once could have been because of life just getting in the way. I see a lot of things, and I think the reason I'm bringing this up is I see this on the social media where people say, well, we need to put armed, former service members in our schools and problem solved. Just because you served in the military doesn't mean you still have the same skills you once did. The worst thing that we could possibly have happen is a school teacher accidentally shoot a student, say during a violent encounter where an active shooter has come in, and they shoot one of the school students trying to escape the violence, and they accidentally shoot them. That's the last thing we need. So having that, whatever type of qualification that must be met, holding that standard of training to the highest expectations is without a doubt should be part of it. The other thing I think about is, what if responding police officers arrive on scene during an active shooter incident and they see a person with a gun and accidentally shoot a member of the school personnel who's trying to merely stop the shooter? How could they identify themselves? You see the problem there. So what do we do in regards to fortifying our schools as it is? You can't get into most places like airports, certain types of civic centers, buildings, like state buildings, without going through metal detectors. Wouldn't that be a huge deterrent for any say, student who decides to go into the school and shoot up the place. That's one thing. Metal detectors in schools work. Limiting the entry to, say, one area where you have to funnel everybody into the school through one junction point where they must get scanned through security. If that is not another option, then every school, for the most part across our nation, has a school resource officer or several of them. What do we do to make our SROs better? Here's some advice. You shouldn't have an assigned parking spot for the SRO. We don't need to telegraph our positions. School resource officers do not need to fall into a daily routine. When they get to the school, they need to mix it up. They need to enter through different doors. They never need to have that everyday routine where they have their office and everything is just like clockwork. The two Columbine shooters of 1999 in Littleton, Colorado, they had a plan for that SRO, but he happened to not be parked in his normal spot that day. Having a set of daily routine as a law enforcement officer, big mistake. Just want you to think about that. I want you guys to post your comments below, please. Let's keep it professional. What do you think is the best option to keeping our schools protected? I'll see you on the range.